Good evening, and welcome to today's meeting of the Commonwealth Club of California, the place where you're in the know, presented in association with the CEN, an organization for Pan-Asian leaders. You can find us on the internet at commonwealthclub.org. I'm Anna Mock, Vice Chairman of the Commonwealth Club of California's Board of Governors, Executive Vice President of Ascen's National Board of Directors, partner at Deloitte & Touche, and most importantly, your chair for today's program. Tonight's program is also a part of the Commonwealth Club's Good Lit series, underwritten by the Bernard Osher Foundation. Now it's my pleasure to introduce you to today's special guest, Amy Chua, author of the best-selling book, The Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother, and John M. Duff Professor of Law at the Yale Law School. Amy was born in the year of the tiger, 1962. She's not afraid to disclose her age, clearly, in Champaign, Illinois, when she was 8, and her father, Leon Chua, who actually also happens to be in the audience, became a professor at UC Berkeley, and her family moved west to California. She attended Harvard College, and in 1987, graduated from Harvard Law School. While at Harvard Law School, Professor Chua was executive editor of the Harvard Law Review. Amy practiced law for 4 years in New York City, where she worked on international transactions throughout Asia, Europe, and Latin America. In 1994, she joined the Duke University Faculty of Law, and in 2001, she joined the Yale Law School faculty. Amy's first book, World on Fire: How Exporting Free Market Democracy Breeds Ethnic Hatred and Global Instability, was a New York Times bestseller. Her second book, Day of Empire: How Hyperpowers Rise to Global Dominance and Why They Fall, was a critically acclaimed foreign affairs bestseller. Especially since the release of her latest book, Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother, Amy has received much media attention, and I think that's a bit of an understatement, including numerous television appearances on shows such as The Today Show, Good Morning America, Charles Rose, and The Colbert Report. Tonight, Ms. Chua will discuss the parenting cultural divide, her struggles and aspirations as a parent, and what it really means to be a tiger mother. Please welcome Amy Chua.
Thank you so much, Anna, and thank you all for coming this evening. It is a great pleasure and honor for me to be speaking at the Commonwealth Club, which I've actually heard about and desperately wanted to be a part of ever since I was a student at El Cerrito High School more than 30 years ago. So yes, to put it mildly, it has been an intense year. Things have happened to me, both good and bad, that I couldn't have imagined for a million years. On the not-so-good front, the very day my book came out, it was actually exactly a year ago yesterday, January 11th, the very day my book came out, the infamous Wall Street Journal article had just appeared 2 days earlier, and I was suddenly receiving 500 emails a day, feeling completely shell-shocked. But on that day when my book came out, I was invited onto the Today Show. I appeared right after Snooki, and right before the cast of The Hangover 2. But whereas Snooki got asked about her hot new Snooki slippers line, the very first question that Meredith Vieira, the host, asked me, this is at 6 a.m. in front of 2 million people, is, yes or no, are you a monster? Now that's a conversation starter. 5 days and approximately 500,000 internet hits later, my family would be referred to as the most notorious household in the Western world. On the positive side, I've heard from thousands of people from all backgrounds, all over the country, who wrote to say that reading my book made them laugh, cry, and understand their own families better. And this has made everything worth it and helped carry me through some of the rougher periods. On the just plain surreal front, I have had 2 live tigers in my house. as part of a photo shoot for Time magazine. I was told beforehand that they would be 6 weeks old and 8 weeks old, and that they would be cute little things just like big kittens. Well, apparently there was a miscommunication, because when they arrived, they were 6 months and 8 months old, and there were these humongous roaring beasts that arrived in cross chains with these 2 trainers wearing, like space protective gear, restraining them and throwing them live chickens. And as part of the photo shoot, this is actually completely true. The photographer asked me to reach down and grab one of these tigers by, I don't know what you call it, the scruff, and yank it up like a real tiger mother would. And so I said at one point, and then I said, now these creatures, they couldn't actually eat a human being, could they? And the trainer thought about it and said, most likely not. They've just been fed. Anyway, much of the intense reaction to my book has been based on a misunderstanding. As I'm sure everybody knows, the Wall Street Journal excerpted some portions from the very opening of my book under the headline, "Why Chinese Mothers Are Superior." And I feel like a broken record. I must have said this 1,000 times, but I feel compelled to say it again. I did not choose or ever see that headline until I opened up the newspaper, and I do not agree with it. I do not believe that Chinese parenting is superior. I believe there are many ways of being a good parent. And in fact, if you're wondering, how did a Yale law professor who usually writes about globalization and foreign policy end up writing this book? The answer is that I actually wrote this book in a moment of utter crisis, when my younger daughter, Lulu, rebelled at age 13. By way of very quick background, as Anna mentioned, I was raised myself by very strict Chinese immigrant parents who came to the United States in 1960 to attend graduate school. And my parents, who are both actually in the audience, actually eloped to MIT. Really romantic, Dad. But they were so poor when they got here, they couldn't afford heat their first 2 winters in Boston and had to wear blankets around to keep warm. As parents, my mom and dad demanded total respect and were very tough with my 3 younger sisters and me. And in fact, the famous list that I feel like the entire world has now seen, the no grade lower than an A-, no play dates, sleepovers, got to play the piano or violin, that list, which I intended to be kind of tongue-in-cheek, was actually applied to me straight, with no humor. But the strategy worked with me. Today, I adore my parents. We actually voluntarily vacation with my parents. They're very close to my daughters. And I feel I owe them everything. And in fact, while I had lots of complaints going, oh, God, why all these rules? Why can't we be normal? In retrospect, where I am now, I feel that that my parents, having had high expectations for me, coupled with love, of course, obviously if there's no love, there's nothing. But my parents, having had high expectations for me, is the greatest gift that anyone has ever given me. And that is why I wanted to that is why even though my husband is not Chinese, I tried to raise my own 2 daughters, Sophia and Lulu, the same way that my parents raised me. Now with my first daughter, Sophia, things went very smoothly. She was an easy kid, she was self-motivated, I never had to force her to do anything. Now she's actually got a very strong personality, and there's a line at the end of the book that she made me put in. And it's where she says, Mommy, people reading this book are going to assume that your strict parenting was imposed on me, when in fact, I chose to go along with it by my own will. Nevertheless, it was very easy dealing with her, and I got cocky. I was thinking, what is wrong with all these parents? You just have to be a little firm? It's easy. But then my second daughter, Lulu, came along, and she is a real fireball. I know there are parents out there. She and I have very similar personalities, which I think might be part of the issue. But boy, did I get my comeuppance. Lulu and I locked horns from day one. Even before day one, even when it was weird, even before Even when I was pregnant with her, she was kicking so hard that I was black and blue. But I do feel that she was born saying no. And the book, which is supposed to be funny, I spent the last year trying to explain that, is filled with zany showdowns between my two daughters and me, in which they always win. And it's weird to read about myself in the media. There's one that's out there that says, Amy Chua cruelly put her 3-year-old daughter out in the freezing cold. Here's how that scene actually went. It's in chapter 2. It's on the 4th page. You don't have to look that far. It was a very freezing cold day. Lulu was 3, and I decided that we would try playing the piano for the first time. So I put all these pillows, and I sat her down, and I told her to play a note 3 times. Well, Lulu, just like Lulu, instead of listening to me, began smashing at the piano with 2 open fists. When I told her to stop, she started screaming and kicking and ripping things and tearing my hair. And after 15 minutes of this, I dragged her over to the door, and it was freezing cold outside. And I said, Lulu, you can't stay in this house if you don't stop screaming and kicking. So what does Lulu do? She's just dressed in a sweater and tights and a skirt, not even a coat. She looks at me, and then she steps outside and faces me defiant. I started panicking. And if you read that scene, you see that I ended up having to bribe her to come back in with hot chocolate and brownies. I realized at that moment that she would rather freeze to death than listen to me. And it's basically been that way ever since. There is nothing, literally nothing I can threaten her with, which is why I've stopped doing that. She always calls my bluff. Another one of my favorite parts is another music scene, actually. Some of you might relate to this. In the middle of a violin practice session, Lulu bursts out, "Stop it, Mommy, just stop it." And I respond, "Lulu, I didn't say anything. I didn't say one word." And Lulu says, "Your brain is annoying me." I know what you're thinking. And she was right. I was thinking that her right elbow was too high, her dynamics were all wrong, and she had to shape her phrases better. So the first 2/3 of the book is supposed to be comic. Much of it is self-parody. It's the first line of the book that my 2 dogs are mentioned, but nobody ever mentions them. But the last third of the book is very different. The book swerves because my life swerves. When Lulu turned 13, she rebelled. We'd always argued, but really Lulu and I have just been close all our lives. And after these arguments when she was little, we'd always end up in bed snuggling, making fun of each other. But when she turned 13, and I think this is not an Asian, this is just universal adolescence, Lulu rebelled in a way that was not funny at all. I could feel it. She suddenly became very angry and alienated and rude and seemed to turn against everything I'd ever stood for. Around the same time, my younger sister, Katrine, got leukemia and had to have a bone marrow transplant. It was a very dark stage in my life, the worst 2 years of my life. And I had always been an overconfident mom, but for the first time in my life, I started asking myself, is my family falling apart? Have I done everything wrong? And I'm not going to give it away for those of you who hadn't read the book, but the culminating scene of the book actually takes place in Red Square, Moscow. And Lulu and I had a terrible, humiliating, screaming public fight. And Lulu basically clearly said to me, the most painful things that anyone has ever said to me, including Meredith Vieira. She said, "I hate you, I hate this family, I hate the violin, you make me feel bad about myself, you're a terrible mother, you're selfish, everything you say you do for me is actually for yourself." So I actually think I'm pretty hard on myself in this book. It's pretty sort of openly self-incriminating. But anyway, after that, I actually changed pretty much cold turkey. Not completely, but I pulled back. And it was weird. It took that moment. Right then, I sort of saw it differently, and I realized, oh my God, I might actually lose my daughter. And when I framed it that way, then I didn't care about the violin or school or anything. I just didn't want to lose my daughter. So began a slow process, but I basically let Lulu drop the violin, which was very painful. She was a beautiful player, concert master. She wanted to play tennis instead. Really loosened up socially. I mean, the kid, she's only 15, she's got an iPod, Facebook, texting. She's had 4 sleepovers in the last 2 months, which I am not happy about. In case you think I'm a convert, I just don't have choice. It's a work in progress. So Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother is the story of just my own journey as a mother. It was never intended to be a parenting guide or a sally into the mommy wars. And in fact, I started writing it the very day after that explosive fight in Red Square. The next morning, I got up, I went to my computer, and Anna mentioned my 2 previous books. I actually have terrible writer's block. I'm the kind of person that I get up really early, I stare at my computer for hours, and if I can get 2 sentences down a day, I feel good. In this case, the words just poured out. I wrote the first 2/3 of this book in just 2 months. I showed every single page to both my daughters, every line actually, and also to my husband, and it was basically like family therapy. What's embarrassing is that I intended for this book to be much more literary. Total fail. Because it's not even exactly a memoir. I mean, it's completely true, but it's not even exactly a memoir. The models that I had in mind when I wrote this book were actually David Sedaris, a book by, he's from the Bay Area too, Dave Eggers, A Heartbreaking Work of Staggering Genius, and then a much more obscure book by Vladimir Nabokov, some of you may know, called Pale Fire. And the thing that those books have in common is that I have always loved books with unreliable narrators, where you can't quite believe everything they're saying. It's like you have to read between the lines. It's filled with weird contradictions. So in this book, I am a character in my own book, a very flawed and obtuse character, and the reality of what is happening is conveyed through the critical voices of my 2 daughters. And if you read this book, you see instantly that my daughters were not raised in a traditional Asian household at all. Growing up, because I was raised in a traditional Asian household, I was terrified of my dad and mom. I would never have talked back to them. By contrast, my story is told entirely through the strong, rebellious voices of both Sophia and Lulu. And what so many people miss about this book, because of all the stuff about the rules, they read that superficially, is this book actually celebrates rebellion. Lulu, I think the heroine of the book, is clearly a rebel. At the end, the last chapter, I reveal that my own father was a rebel. You know, the person I admire most, along with my mom, he himself was a black sheep and turned his back on his family, hated his family, left Asia, never looked back. And the entire book is defiantly nonconformist and outrageous. I remember my mother, who actually likes the book, said to me, "No Chinese person would ever write this." So my book is more complex than some of you may have heard. Having said that, the book, of course, does have a point of view. And, you know, I deserve, in part, what I've gotten. While I certainly have regrets, if I had to raise my girls all over again, I would basically do the same thing, with some adjustments. I'm not saying it's for everybody. I'm certainly not saying it's a better way. But myself, I am a proud, strict mom, taken down a few notches. But I'm proud of the daughters I raised, and especially proud of my relationship with them. And I guess more generally, I do think that Western parenting, I'm using that term very loosely. I know there are 1,000 different kinds of Western parenting, even in this room. But I do think that using that term loosely, I think parenting in the West today has become too permissive and too indulgent and too fear-driven. I believe that we in the West can ask a little more of our kids, and they will not only rise to the challenge, but thrive. Now, since I want to leave lots of time for Q&A, I just want to make 3 quick points, maybe to add it to the conversation. First, I think this is probably the biggest misunderstanding about my views. If I had a magic button and I could just push it and choose either happiness or success for my children, I would push happiness in a second. That's a no-brainer. I just happen to think that it's much more complicated than that. I don't believe that if you tell your children, do whatever you want, you're perfect, you're great, that will necessarily lead to happier adults. I'm not even sure that it leads necessarily to happier children. Jokes aside about gold medals and A pluses, for me actually this tiger parenting has nothing to do with achievement or success. For me, it's about believing in your child and teaching them that they are capable of so much more than they think, and that if they don't make excuses and don't blame others and hold themselves to a high standard, they can do whatever they want in life and break through any barriers and not ever have to care what other people think. Certainly, that's what my own parents conveyed to me, and it's what I try to instill in my own girls. Second, some of you might be interested to know, the book has come out in 30 languages, and it did very well in China, sadly, for all the wrong reasons. But you might be, you might be interested to know that in China, my book is being marketed in exactly the opposite way. And in fact, when I first saw the Chinese edition, I remember calling my agent and my husband and saying, oh my God, I need to bring a lawsuit. I need to bring an injunction to stop this thing. Because when I saw the Chinese edition, you know the English title is Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother. Here's how, it's same text, I didn't change the inside of the book, but here's the title, here's how they translated the title. The book in Chinese is called Parenting by a Yale Law Professor. Subtitle, How to Raise Kids in America. So, and the cover is a picture of me, a huge picture of me, wrapped in a red, white, and blue flag. So when I called, I said, we got to stop this thing, but I talked to my friends and lawyers and judges and people I know in China, and they all said to me the same thing. They said, Amy, I know it looks kind of tacky, it looks bad, it's weird, but it's not actually that bad a title. And the reason for that is because in China, they have exactly the opposite problem. Even today, with all the stuff you hear about Prada and Shanghai, even today, even very young kids basically study or drill or practice from 7 a.m. till 10 p.m. every day. Grades are publicly posted. There are teachers who tell good students not to play with bad students. Very little time for friends or relaxation. Never heard of a sleepover. I've actually just recently been in China. I'm writing a cover story for Newsweek on China's new self-made women billionaires, which is coming out in a week or two. So it's very interesting. I'm happy to talk about that. But I was asked in front of this big group, again, all these people are sort of taking this thing as a how-to guide. I keep telling them, trying to explain. But when they finally asked me, what do you think is the most important thing that we can do for our children here, in this country? I thought about it, and I said to a large media audience, I said, you're not going to believe this, but I think what this country needs for their children is some more play dates and sleepovers. I do not think, by the way, that that's what we need more of in the United States. Finally, and on this note, I will end. The whole entire conversation about my book has been framed in terms of Chinese versus Western, partly probably because of the Wall Street Journal thing and also what's on people's minds. But it wasn't really my intention, especially if you read, I won't give it away, the last page of my book. If you think about it, what we're calling tiger parenting is just not that different from the traditional parenting of America's founders and pioneers. If you just, all my favorite childhood books, Caddy Woodlawn, Johnny Tremaine, Little House on the Prairie, think about those. And how many sleepovers do you think Abraham Lincoln had? Or if you take the generation of Americans who pulled themselves out of the Great Depression, how do you think those people parented? I don't think their main concern was being service providers for their kids and arranging play dates. For them, parenting was about instilling a work ethic in their children and a sense of respect and responsibility. I didn't write this book to have foreign policy implications. Those were my other two, but nobody paid attention to them. But of course, there is, now that I think about it in retrospect, at first I said, no, this book has nothing to do with anything else I've done. It just came from the heart. But in retrospect, thinking about it, of course there is a link between child rearing and the future of nations, our nation's future. Like it or not, we as parents are raising the next generation. So at stake is not just our children's well-being, but the durability of the American dream. Perhaps it's time for us in America to reclaim those traditional American values, not Chinese, but American values of hard work, responsibility, rigor, and respect for excellence. Thank you.
Our thanks to Amy Chua, author of the Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother. Now we'll go on to the question and answer session of today's program. I have some questions here, Amy, and then we'll collect some from the audience as we go along. I'm sure we'll have to manage the time since I think we'll have a lot of questions here. So I'm going to start off first. You mentioned a bit of the media response. What's surprised you the most now a year later about the media and the public's reaction?
Pretty much everything surprised me about the media. First, I was just surprised that people could get so upset about one person's story. So that was part of the Wall Street Journal excerpt. Secondly, I really learned that it's almost the first thing in my life that I've just had no control over. I just could not change. I still can't. I still don't think people get it. And the power of the internet is, really extraordinary. And you see something's out there, and it's just suddenly all over the world. It's viral. And no matter, the hard work thing, really couldn't do it. I would just go around trying to clarify misunderstandings. So that was interesting. I will say it's just gotten so much better. I mean, now that people are actually reading the book, I'm definitely, it's the fun stage where people will write me. People will say, okay, I admit it, I'm one of the people that sent you the nasty ones. But I read the book and it's so different. I can't believe this happened to you.
So people have a different impression after they fully read the book versus what...
Yeah, in fact, I would say, some people read the book and don't like it either, but I really would say that 90% of the really angry comments are by people who did not read the book. So it's been frustrating. It's been like, I feel like I've had to be defending a book that I didn't write, and also I feel it's a little bit tragic because I know from all the emails I get that most people out there want actually to have a thoughtful, elevated conversation, non-judgmental, you just about, since parenting people care about. But I have found that it's very hard to elevate the conversation. In every one of these, major media things, the question is always, did you or did you not burn the stuffed animals? And, it's just not gonna, I don't think that's the place where the discussion should be.
Related to that, I think many believe you may have intentionally dramatized your parenting approach to gain some of the media attention, maybe have some good PR, and clearly have sold a lot of books as a result of all this press. What's your response to that?
I think anybody who said that can't have read the book or just didn't get the humor. It's it's such a weird characterization to dramatize. I guess I would say that I intended the book to be satirical and hyperbolic, and again, I intended it to be much more literary. And I don't feel that I've had a single major review that actually got it. There are all these clever little funny twists. The book is filled with contradictions. Like right on the opening page, I say, I think people who believe in astrology have serious problems. Then the next line I say, but, the Chinese zodiac describes my daughters perfectly, and I'm the tiger, and I'm some, and all through it there are these astrological, and there are lines in the book like, maybe this is over dramatization, although I actually said this, when Lulu asked if she could have a pet, I did say to her, you already have a pet, Lulu, your violin is your pet. But I'm sort of making fun of myself for the kind of over-the-top things that I said. So I would say in response to that, I think it's just a category mistake.
Does some of the content in the book imply you're a person of conflict? Meaning you have a lot of internal conflict?
I can't imagine a single human being who is not a person of conflict. That's what's interesting about human beings. Human nature is full of conflicts. I am maybe especially, I don't know if it's called conflicts. I'm definitely, like maybe some of you, somebody that's part of many cultures, right? So my parents were Chinese, but outsiders because they grew up in the Philippines. then they came here, and I was born here, but Chinese was my first language, and I have always known what it's like to be an outsider. You know, I was that kid in Indiana who had a funny accent and glasses, really fat headgear, and I remember every moment. I remember, you know, a guy in 4th grade named Jeremy Hall, you know, making fun of the way I pronounced the word restaurant, you know, because I said it restaurant. And I remember him running around going, restaurant, restaurant, you know. And so I've always known what it's like to be an outsider. And if that's what it means, in a way, to be conflicted, you know, to be bicultural, tricultural. But I would say that in my life, I've always tried to convert being an outsider into a strength. So my first book, World on Fire, is about market-dominant minorities, not oppressed, victimized minorities, but minorities like the Chinese in Indonesia or Malaysia or the Indians in East Africa that actually come to dominate economies but are politically very vulnerable. The second book was about rise and fall of hyperpowers. My thesis was that the secret to hyperpower, dumb, is actually not military whatever, but rather tolerance, and it's actually being able to draw on the strength of immigrants, actually, outsiders. So in a way, and this book is actually, I think one of the reasons it's so jarring for people is that it's written in an outsider voice, but it's a proud outsider voice. And I think a lot of more Asian American literature is about people feeling discriminated or victim, you know, and this is a jarring, defiant outsider voice. So it's, but, you know, so yeah, I guess I'm conflicted.
But by many measures, you know, on this topic of being an outsider, you and your family have clearly been very successful, academically, professionally, et cetera. So are you an insider now?
You know, I mentor a lot of actually Asian American students at Yale Law School, and I don't think, I wrote this in my book. I said, I still sometimes feel like an outsider. I do, I quite often do. And I noticed that I think my daughters never do. That doesn't mean that they don't feel left out and bad, but just specifically this term, I'll sometimes walk into the Yale Law School faculty room and just, you know, and I love my colleagues. They're so nice to me, all great friends. But sometimes I'll just walk in and look and just say, I don't belong here. You know, something is wrong with this picture. So you know, but as I said, for me, there's a line in my book that is actually, I wish people would quote these lines instead of the ones about the stuffed animals, because there are interesting things. I've said that for me, being an outsider is a privilege rather than a burden, because I think it gives me a different lens, and you know, it's sort of, it's a different perspective.
I have a few questions on parenting, which I think a lot of people in the audience would be interested in. You know, in theory, if your child obviously did his or her best and got a B- maybe, or a B, you know, do you think that at a Tiger mom would have a hard time really objectively determining the child's effort in that, or would it ever be good enough?
I think that's actually a real issue, one of the big problems in this kind of parenting. What I always say to my girls is, you know, I actually say the American cliche, which is as long as you try your best, I'm okay. So, you know, like we work really hard on something for when we used to do music competitions or a test. After I thought they worked really hard, I would say, now I do not care at all what the result is, you know, because you're always going to get bad luck or you're going to freak out or something. And that actually makes them feel a lot better. Here's the key, though. I have a very high standard for what I think counts as trying your best. And I disagree with Lulu all the time about it, and I constantly battle with her, even just 2 days ago. I walked in, I said, you know, she's got a big chemistry test, and I said, Lulu, you're really smart, you're really quick, you're probably going to do well in this, but I just want to register now that I don't think you've worked hard enough. I don't think you've tried your best, because you've got the headphones on and the music and the video and the Facebook and all this stuff going on while you're doing, you know, but it's a serious question that you're asking me. I think I got very lucky with my own parents because there was never any question that they loved me. You know, honestly, I think that if you convey to your child, if you don't get an A, then I don't love you, then that's just terrible parenting, period, flat out, you know. And I think one tragedy it's not just an Asian thing, it happens in lots of immigrant families or even non-immigrant families, right? I think some parents have a hard time expressing love. And this was particularly true of earlier generations, I think, of Asian parents. I know this is a tremendous problem. These women I interviewed in China, these billionaires, they all had parents that were suffered under the Cultural Revolution, but they all had miserable childhoods, and they just did not feel their parents loved them. You know, there was so much going on. So I think it's a real issue, knowing when to stop, how much is yourself, and how much is believing in your child, and how much is just, you know, being unreasonable. One final thing, I do want to say that the focus on grades, you know, my mom is here, and my youngest sister, as some of you know, has Down syndrome. And this, I think, is the best illustration of what I think is the best way to tiger parent. You know, nobody thought that Cindy could get A's or go to college or anything like that. But I remember my mother working so hard with her early on, you know, teaching her to tie shoelaces and pit cherries. And I mean, even I, as a girl, would think like, Mommy, I just don't think she has the muscle coordination, you know? But my mom would stick it out, and she would drill multiplication tables with her and practice piano with her. Well, today, Cindy lives in Fremont. She lives, you know, independently. She just got engaged. She works at Walmart. She's got, her favorite thing is still really to perform piano, you know, not at a super high level, but for her friends. And I guess the best part is that she and my mom have a really incredible relationship, and she has great self-esteem. So I think that's like, you know, the happy version, when it's really not about a B- or an A. It's just about helping your child realize their potential, whatever it is.
You talked about self-esteem, and there's been a lot of media attention that too much parental pressure and clearly focus on success does negatively impact self-esteem, and it has led to things like teen suicide, self-mutilation, you name it.
Yeah.
Where do you believe, and how did you know you didn't cross that line?
Well, that's one of the reasons I wrote the book. You know, I sort of felt like, I just read the passage, I mean, I sort of felt like this book should appeal, I meant for it to appeal to people who have suffered under very strict parenting, right? Because I sort of felt like I came in some ways up to the line. I myself feel like I'm lucky that I didn't, because I had my husband, I had my parents, my mom was telling me to pull back, and I sort of feel like I pulled back in time, but there is that danger, you know, where and I think you just have to listen. You know, you're looking, and for when she was younger, it was always like, it just always came out right, and so I was reaffirmed. But then when things changed, I remember suddenly looking at her and thinking, oh my God, she's just incredibly unhappy, you know, and that's why I let her drop the violin. I mean, she just, and we made a lot of changes, and we talked about it, and she's so much happier now, and it's so much easier on me, you know. So one of the lessons I learned is, I think that this kind of, if we want to call it tiger parenting, and I think it really is mostly about, and really should be mostly about, just very early child rearing, you know, trying to instill a sense of focus and hard work and kind of self-discipline at a very young age, you know, really like between the ages of 5 and 12, where this does differ very much from Western parenting. But as kids start getting to be 12, 13, I think that's when you need to just you need to listen more, let them have their own choices, and the hope is that they will apply some of those values you've instilled, some of that hard work ethic, to something that they love, you know. And I mean, knock on wood, it's still a work in progress, but Lulu now, you know, she's a great tennis player. I mean, nothing fancy, but I do think that she's applied, you know, a lot of the same kinds of values just to something that she sensed was going to be much more for her temperament and personality, and she was right about that.
You're listening to the Commonwealth Club of California radio program, and our guest today is Amy Chua, author of The Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother, who is discussing the parental cultural divide. Amy, the next question. Obviously, there's many takeaways from your book about tiger parenting. Are there some particular redeeming qualities about what you've coined the Western style of parenting?
Yeah, not just some. I mean, I think the whole book is, I end the book talking about the founding fathers, actually, and it's my last point. I mean, the whole conversation has gotten hijacked, you know, by the excerpt to be Chinese versus Western, but I really deeply believe that this kind of parenting is just not that different from traditional Western parenting, any kind of parenting. You know, the way we parent today in the United States bears very little resemblance to parenting from almost any other generation. I think helicopter parenting is totally new. I don't think it's like even cyclical or anything like that. And it's born of luxury, So I would say there are, of course, enormous strengths in Western parenting. The emphasis on choice and freedom and the celebration of irreverence and thinking outside the box and independence and freedom. I mean, all of the elite, wealthy people in China that I have met with and talking to, every single one of them wants to send their child not just to Western college, but to Western boarding school. They really admire our education system. So for me, it's not about knocking. We don't want to go to the extreme of Asia. I think they have harder problems. How do you generate creativity? How do you jumpstart thinking outside the box? Whereas I just feel like we've swung too far in the other direction. I think we should keep all the things that we have. I think it's great that we emphasize civic values and community service and independence and freedom. But I think we should also not lose what I think are also traditional American values, which is a work ethic and a sense of respect and responsibility, and not just blame you. You get one bad grade, you want to sue the school is your first response. Take responsibility. And so, I guess for me, the core of this Tiger parenting is I do believe that we should assume strength rather than fragility in our children. And you mentioned self-esteem, and I don't think one system has it better than the other. I don't think somebody could do an empirical survey, but I don't think, at least in this country, that you're going to find that strict Tiger parenting leads to lower self-esteem because there are, I think if you just tell your child all the time, you're perfect, you're great, you're wonderful, at some point, trying to build their self-esteem by telling them that, at some point they're going to go out into the real world. And it's tough out there. I'm not even talking about adulthood, I just mean junior high school, right? And when you don't do so well at school, or you don't make the sports team that you really wanted to, you see the popular kids strutting by, or later on, you don't get the job you want. You can't pursue your passion because you don't have the skills. That's when you really feel bad and when you really lose self-esteem. So I don't think any culture has a monopoly on, I think there are bad Western parents and good Western parents. I think there are bad Asian parents and good Asian parents, right? And it's just about trying to find that right balance of having high expectations, but also conveying absolute unconditional love.
So you talked about these successes. How did you prepare your daughters for some of these potential, I'll loosely call them failures, given how successful they've been throughout their lives?
To me, this is one of the great strengths of Tiger parenting, if you will, is that I actually think it tends to build resilience. I just wrote this in the anniversary Wall Street Journal piece. But I think, now that Sophia's in college, people ask me, do you Tiger parent her from abroad, long distance? Are you Skyping her, piano instructions? And I say, oh my God, it's exactly the opposite. We are literally the most hands-off college parents I know. And that's because my job is totally done. I am so confident that she is well prepared to take this on, And it's the same way when I went off to college. And, because she's got these sort of skills, and I think a child who's the response they know is like, you're great, you're perfect, all their lives, it must be pretty shocking for that person to fail at something, right? Because it's never happened before. They've been coddled and protected. By contrast, I do think that Tiger Cubs tend to be pretty resilient. Somebody who said, that essay is just bad. You have to try again, or yes, you got a bad grade. It's not the teacher's fault. I think it goes to your self-esteem and inner strength point too. I think it's actually incredibly empowering to know that hard work can fix just about anything. That you don't have to be brilliant. You could just slog it through and try again, and it's the ability, in some ways I think preparing kids to be self-reliant and strong and to be able to pick themselves up off the floor and try again is in some ways the whole goal, I think, of Tiger parenting.
So you mentioned your daughter and your daughter's college admission. So I believe your older daughter has just started at Harvard.
Yep, she's a freshman.
And so she's a freshman at Harvard. So do you believe that if you weren't a Tiger parent, she would have gone into Harvard?
You know, I've thought about this so much, and one of the big messages in my book, there are many themes, but one of the themes is about irrepressible personalities. My two daughters have been the same two girls since they were born. So in some ways, the book is about how little control we as parents have, you know. And so with Sophia, honestly, if I think about it, she was always so self-motivated. I think she probably would have ended up the same place. I mean, when asked, she says maybe not the piano, which she actually loves now. But I think, you know, so that's bad for me. I was useless. But I think, ironically, it's with my second daughter, who is the one that I have all the fights with, who's the one I, you know, have so much trouble with. I actually think it's, I hope, knock on wood, I think it's actually her that I feel more pride in, because she was a very classic second child responding to a very high-achieving older sibling. And I remember when she was growing up, her whole stance was, I hate school, I'm bad at school, I don't like this, I don't want to be successful, I don't want to do this. And if I thought in my heart that if I had said, it's okay, you don't need to be good at school, you could just be who you are, you don't have to do this, you whatever, we love you anyway. If I thought that that would lead to her being a happy adult, I would have done that so much easier, so much easier. But watching just people I know, relatives, I mean, just friends, that's not the case. It's often not the case. People like that often grow up to have enormous self-doubt. They judge themselves. And so I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but I know that Lulu, given how incredibly bright and just so funny she is, I know that she would end up being an amazing person no matter what I did. But I like to think that I may have saved her some pain. You know, I think that it might have been a harder route. It might have been, you know, and right now, you know, she was asked by the UK Guardian in an interview. They took my girls into 2 separate rooms and asked them, what kind of parents are you going to be when you grow up? You know, I know that they were like, you know, wanting to dig out some stuff, and I was holding my breath. What is Lulu going to say? And she thought about it, and you know, and she said, you know, I think I'm going to be a strict parent too. And she said, you know, my mom and I have had a lot of trouble. But now that I think about it, if she hadn't been the mom she was, I wouldn't be the person I am today, and I wouldn't like that. So I'm going to be a strict parent. But still, she's still just 15, so we'll see. Jury's out.
While we collect the question cards, let me go, since you mentioned Lulu, she said, and there's a quote in the book, she accused you of being, you're a show-off, it's all about you. Which begs really the question of how much of what you did for your daughters were really unselfishly for them, rather than for you and whatever your needs were for, as a parent?
Great question. The first thing I want to point out is that line, you know, you're a show-off, it's all for you. That's in my book because I wrote it. I put it in the book. And I've had this weird experience, it's in my afterword, where in all these media interviews, people will say, okay, did your daughter compare you to Lord Voldemort? You know, and I'll say, yes, I did, you know, when she was 8, that's in the book. And they'll be like, so you confess? And I'm like, no, it's like I'm in Inquisition, and they've caught me. But no, I wrote the book. I put those scenes in the book. I wrote every line of the book. So it's aggressively self-incriminating, and it's part of the reason it's been interesting dealing with this. But the question you ask actually is a very serious one. And in the middle of the book, again, I like these unreliable narratives, because in the middle of the book, I mean, the book has an arc. So at the beginning of the book, it's this obtuse, overconfident voice. But at the middle of the book, I've had a few rough things have happened, but I'm still struggling to be confident. And in the middle of the book, I answer this question, and I say, you know, Westerners often ask them, but Amy, raised eyebrows, you know, when you do this, is this for your daughters or, and then always the knowing look, for yourself? And what I say in the book is that I find this a very Western question because in some ways, at least the way I always thought of it for, I don't know if I should say, you know, Asian parity, but at least this kind of thing that I'm familiar with is the child is essentially like a part of yourself. They're like your heart. So that's why it would be impossible, unimaginable for me to even imagine competing with my children. They're like, there's a Chinese term, 宝贝. It's like something so precious. It's like part of yourself. So that's how, what I answer in the book is I say, I think it's 100% unequivocally for my children. And the reason I know this is because so much of what I do is incredibly painful and horrible and miserable. Like whereas other people get to go off and get a pedicure and then go off to Mud Springs with their friends, I have to scream and yell and be hated by somebody I love. So that's the line I put in the middle of the book. But that's not even the full answer. I think your question, by the time I got to the end of the book, I think I learned that I think it's a hard line. I think it's a hard line for parents who really want for their kids and believe that they know what's best for their kids. And while your kids are young, you may know. But then at a certain point, I think Lulu knew better. I feel like I have a hard time with Lulu, but at another level, I admire her so much. And the book is kind of dedicated to her because it's like she knew she wanted to be happy. And she knew that she had to resist me to be happy. She knew what she needed to do to kind of be happy. And I sort of feel like she was sending me all these signals, And it's funny now, we get along so much better, and she dropped the violin, and just this year, she picked the violin back up. But on her terms. Her terms means instead of the 2 hours a day, she's down to 15 minutes every 3 days. And I can make no comments. And she also occasionally will feel that she doesn't need a teacher, but she's concert master of the high school. And I said, Lulu, I got back on my Tiger Mom horse. I said, Lulu, it's your choice. You didn't have to be this concert master, but now that they have elected you this, do not disgrace yourself. It's an honor they've given you. You can't let that school down. So the fight started again, and she says, this is the payoff for all those years that I put in. This is the payoff. I don't need to practice. So we're still arguing about that.
Still arguing. I think parent-child argument probably never ends in our lifetime, does it? Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about your husband. You made a very early on decision to raise your kids in the Chinese way, even though your husband's not Chinese. Can you talk about the journey he went on, given your style of parenting probably was quite different for him?
Yeah, I have the greatest husband. It's funny, he has had such a bad rap as a result of this. What happened to him? How could he let this happen? But the truth is that my husband actually has an incredibly strong personality. My 2 girls are much more scared of him, even though he never raises his voice, because he has this kind of judgment. They actually think of me as just kind of goofy, ineffectual in some ways. But he wanted to not be part of the book because he didn't want to be a character in my book. He just didn't, he's like, I don't sound like that, and so it was too hard to put words in his mouth, so it kind of excised that. But to answer your question, my husband, despite being raised in exactly the opposite way, the most liberal family, they could do anything, pursue your passions, they didn't even have to wear clothes, just anything. He supported my strict parenting largely. We were pretty much a united front. And the reason for that is he's actually somebody who wished that he had been forced to do more things as a kid. He, for example, I think he thinks he's got a good musical ear, but he can't read music. He can't read notes. He can't play an instrument. And he remembers when he was, 6, his mom said, Jed, do you want to learn to play, the violin, or do you want to play with your friends? Play with my friends. And he regrets that decision. He wished that, and same with foreign languages. Mike, this is one thing. My kids complain about everything, but the one thing they don't complain about is my forcing them to speak Chinese. Because now they're fluent in Mandarin, and they say, it's so cool now. It got to be all the rage. Everybody in their high school wants to learn Chinese. They've got the headphones on. They're learning the accents. It's so hard. And, my daughters know it. So my husband, but more importantly about my husband, again, if you read the book and you read between the lines, you realize that my kids were not raised in a traditional Asian household at all. They were raised distinctly in a hybrid household. So between the lines, you'll see I slip in where I say things like, I'm arguing with my husband because he wants to take my kids to baseball games and make some pancakes and go to the lake for the week, So clearly my kids are not like kids in China. They've got a father who would always say, enough now. We are, we're going for a bike ride. We're, one funny story, I remember a big fight. He wanted to take them to a water park, the thing I hate most, with dangerous slides, And it was right before the day before one of Sophia's piano competitions. And I just went to him. I was hissing. I was like, why today? She's going to injure her fingers. But he had said that he had promised her. And here's what I actually went up to Sophia and I asked her. I said, okay, Sophia, I asked if she would wear these big ski gloves. She said no.
So before I ask the next question, for people from the audience that would like to ask a live question, please do start queuing up at the mic, and we'll get to that. The book clearly talks a lot about a mother-daughter relationships. Do you think it would have been different if you had a son or had sons, and would you have had to adapt your style?
This is the hardest question I've had. I actually don't know, because I've only had 2 daughters, and I come from 4 sisters. And so I don't know, and the only example I do have in my family is my father, and it didn't work so well there. But I'll tell you a story. I was giving a talk at Chicago right when the book came out, and this question was asked of me, and I said, I actually don't know. And a woman raised her hand in the audience and said, I can tell you the answer. The answer is no. It does not work. You will emasculate your children. I've done it with both, and that's the answer. So then I was like, oh, that's really interesting. Then afterwards, I was signing books, and this woman came up with these 2 confident boys, and she said, I have something to tell you. Trust me. It works. You could do it. Yeah. So she said, tell you. So I actually don't know. I don't know. But I definitely think there's equal amounts of empirical evidence on both sides.
In terms of just tiger parenting, there's a new term out there called wolf dads. It's a little bit unfortunate, but it seems like you've created a trend out there around parenting. Some commentary from you, Amy, around that?
Yeah, it's been really surreal. When I went to Shanghai in June to talk about this book, I was in a debate with Shanghai Cat Daddy. And it was so surreal, the cultural difference. He was saying he was really, liberal and didn't want to push his kids to do anything. And just from talking to him, I could tell that they were so much stricter in their household. He is the most liberal guy that So his whole story, and I do think what it is that in China, all the tigerness and all the authoritarianism is already built into the school system, right? It's so harsh already that if I were a parent there, I would say relax, be inspired. I mean, I would do that too. I think that's actually the right balance. But I don't think that's what we have in this country. I mean, the schools are just the opposite. We, celebrate irreverence. But I remember, I'll get to Wolf Dad in a second, but Shanghai Cat Daddy, I said, I don't want to debate. I don't want to debate because my book is not debatable. It's a memoir, but, it was a place to be able to dispel misunderstandings. So he went up there and he was saying that his daughter just, by herself practiced ballet 6 hours a day out of, just her love for it. He never had to, and so they went through this list. Shanghai Cat Daddy, do you approve of sleepovers? And he, this is on TV, millions of people, and he nodded, yes, because I guess that was like whatever. So then I said, excuse me, I had to be translated. I said, do you know what a sleepover is? And he nodded again. I said, and there's a simultaneous translation, so there's a lag. I said, oh, well, sleepover is something that's really fun in the West. It's very popular. Your child will go to a friend's house and stay the night there, sleep over there, and you see the translation kick in, and he says, no, my child never goes sleep somebody else's house. That's what he said. He's like, no, never. Never. I don't know. So it's just like apples and oranges. Now, Wolf Dad came out maybe last month, and this is a guy that I was horrified. It was like kept being compared to him, and I think he's from Guangdong, I think, and I think he said that he had 3 kids that got into Beida, the fanciest university there, and the way he did this was by beating his kids until, now, just because I've suffered so much from the media, I will have to say that I don't want to pronounce on that until I read the book. Because first of all, there's a translation problem, because beating, maybe just, maybe it was just corporal punishment. The other thing I noticed about that is, which we don't do. We don't, but I'm just saying that I've just suffered from it so much myself that I'm just not going to say anything until I've read the book. But he did say that this kind of whatever he's wolf dad thing has to stop at age 12. So that I noticed as being something that I learned the hard way. I thought that was very interesting. So I sent a Twitter message out that I do not align myself with the wolf dad, don't believe in beating anything. But just for the record, I have really no idea whether he could be a very fine father. You know, I just don't trust the message that's projected, actually.
You've made a few references, Amy, to China, and including the article that's coming up. There's many who have been concerned about the fact that your book has created a stereotype about Chinese and Chinese Americans that may not be positive. What's been your response to that?
I think this is the biggest frustration I have. I can't see it. I mean, I'm pretty open-minded because it's funny. It's like it's related to the model minority thing. You know, maybe it's something about airing dirty laundry or something. You know, because there are so many funny videos and things about making fun of these over-the-top Chinese immigrant parents. Everybody knows the A-. No, I mean, they're just, and for me, anybody looking at the list, it's pretty obviously tongue-in-cheek to me. You know, I mean, there are lines in the book that are, you know, there's a line in the book where I say something and then I say, I was deeply moved by my own oration. So, I mean, the whole thing is just so much self-parody. So, but more importantly, I sort of feel like this book is the biggest, best thing that could happen for a Chinese stereotype. Because what is this? You know, I mean, the whole book is so defiantly nonconformist. I think that Asian American literature needs to be a little bit more diverse. Actually, I think humor is a huge way. How do we defeat the model minority stereotype? We need to be original, interesting, humorous, satirical, different. I mean, not every Asian American novel can be the Joy Luck Club. It can't. It can't always be about feeling discriminated against and being a victim. Those have a very valuable role, but it can't be. There's got to be room for other kinds of voices. So I think that if you read the book correctly, I mean, it's a proud voice, which I think is itself very unusual. I don't think there are a lot of Asian American books written in this kind of voice. And also, if you read the book, I don't get how the stereotype can come unless you only read the Wall Street Journal excerpt. Because at the end of the book, I let Lulu drop the violin, where it says no school plays. I tell at the end Lulu wants to do improv. I reveal in the book that I was terrible at math and science. I rebelled and went into law school. I was the first Asian American to be an executive editor of the Harvard Law Review. I mean, in some ways, I feel like the entire book is about breaking through barriers and ceilings. So for that criticism, I respect it. I think it probably comes from people who have had a bad personal experience and are maybe just reading the list or something. And I would just say, I hope you read the whole book, because I actually think it's pretty much exactly the opposite of anything typical Chinese stereotype. My editor, when she bought it, she said, this is completely sui generis. It's like in no category,
So will we expect you on Saturday Night Live soon, given you seem to have a comedic streak or a satirical streak in you?
I met the cast, actually. Yeah, they're really fun. I think that would be fun. The Daily Show, Olivia, whatever, did a send-off on it that was really funny. And so if you Google that, I think it's interesting. I think that's kind of the level at which I intended it. But parenting it's just. I was joking that I'm going to steer clear of this topic for a while when people ask me about my next book, and I was jokingly say I want to go back to sort of a less explosive topic, ethnic conflict in the Middle East, because I think the thing about parenting is that it's so intensely personal for everybody. Not everybody is a parent. I mean, people who are parent feel very strongly because we all want to get it right. We're all worried that we're not getting it right. It's just the stakes are so high. But also, even people who are not parents, we all had parents. So people have incredibly strong reactions sometimes to the way that they were raised, whether well or not so well. So I just think it's just incredibly personal. And, I get what I deserve. I put myself out there, so.
Things around grades and piano and violin, I think people tend to put it in the academic realm. You mentioned a bit this emotional appeal that your book has had. What's your view on emotional intelligence and really helping kids develop that? I know you don't want to be a parenting expert, but it seems like you have lots of views.
Yeah, I do. I actually just wrote about this in the Wall Street Journal, this anniversary piece that just came out about Sophia being in college. And one of the biggest negative things that was said when my book first came out, again, by people who hadn't read it, was that this kind of tiger parenting is going to produce uncreative robots and automatons with no social skills. And I think that there might be a grain of truth to that in China, where the school system is already so oppressive and there's no room for thinking and challenging authority. And then if you come home and you do more of that, I think you could get that. And when I go to China, I see that. I feel like, wow, these kids lack the kind of vibrancy and energy, and there's, it's definitely not good there. But I think in this country, where both in this country where the entire education system, every TV show, the whole culture celebrates irreverence and independence and humor and popularity and social skills, I think that tiger parenting not only does it not produce robots, but I actually think that it produces kids with unusually high emotional intelligence. And the reason for that is twofold. One, they're like used to negotiating. They've got these crazy strict parents that they're dealing with at home, and but they also, are dealing with an environment out there. And I think oftentimes with my own parents, my dad, I asked him if I could go to the senior prom. He said no, just flat out no. My mother intervened, Leon, let her go. It's her last year. He finally agrees, and he says, okay, you can go to the senior prom on one condition, that you be back home by 9 p.m. So I went to the senior prom, I came back at 9 p.m., and then I snuck back out a window. And I didn't do anything bad, but it was just so unreasonable. And I've noticed this with my own students at Yale Law School. Some are Pakistani, some are Nigerian, some are Korean, some are Chinese. I mean, they're all different. And I've seen talk to these tiger cubs, and a lot of them are very, very funny. They're very sophisticated. They're 1 foot in 2 cultures. The second reason I think that tiger parenting, again, in this country, against the background of this society, tends to produce actually very high emotional intelligence is that I think that tiger cubs tend not to be prima donnas, because their kids have told them, like, no, it's your fault, or, pull your own weight. Don't blame others. And I actually think that kids who are very spoiled and entitled, me, end up, when they go out into the real world, I don't think those are good social skills. I think kids who have been taught, they've had parents who've been honest with them, who've called them on some things, actually are going to be better at navigating the social shoals of college, which are very complex. You have a sense of humility and a sense of sort of responsibility to others. So on that front, I actually, that was what my piece was about. I think that based on my limited experience, that tiger parenting, at least in this country, often results in people who are very, very funny and, with exceptionally strong social skills, actually.
Unfortunately, we only have time for one last question, and I'll ask you an easy one. So what next? How do you top Tiger Mom?
I am going back to an academic book. My next book, still top secret, but I'm on leave this semester, and I'm going back to a research academic book. I'm going to tell a story with my mom. The thing is, there is a thing about tiger parenting. Like, I don't want my kids to dread my phone calls, when I'm older. Because the thing about my mom is that she always, when I get a call from her or an email from her, I always know it's going to be constructive criticism. And I also know that it's always right. I mean, that's the unbearable thing. My mom has always been right about every single thing. And I recently got this foreign policy award. I flew my parents to DC. I thought they were going to be so proud and so happy. This does answer your question, you'll see. And it was kind of fun. So I come back, I feel great about myself, and there's an email waiting for me from my mom. And I just have this feeling, and I open it up, and she's like, "Dear Amy, I know that you're not going to want to hear this." And she's like, "But Daddy and I have been talking, and we think that you should really, get rid of all this celebrity thing and go back to the the person of the academic of deep research and integrity that Daddy and I know you really are. So of course, my next book has to be that kind of a book.
On that note, that as a mother of a 11-year-old myself, mothers are always right. So our thanks to Amy Chua, author of the best-selling memoir, The Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother. Thank you to Ascend for partnering with us for tonight's program, which is part of the Commonwealth Club's Good Lit series, underwritten by the Bernard Osher Foundation. We also thank our audience here and on television, radio, and the internet. I'm Anna Mock, and now this meeting of the Commonwealth Club of California, the place where you're in the know, is officially adjourned.